Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and today with me as always is my amazing co-host, Caleb. Caleb, how you doing on a Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, getting stuff done. It's the weekends are not for relaxing.
It is the first day of fall here in Minnesota.
Oh, is it?
It is.
Oh.
So happy fall to you. Say we are back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how it has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, who's our guest today?
Today we were joined by Erica. Now, Erica is somebody that we maybe crossed paths with in a youth group setting barely, but she was raised at the church long before either of us were at the church.
Yes.
And then eventually went through the youth group in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s is kind of when she was at the youth group and at Five Oaks' youth group. So it was great to have her on the show.
Yeah, it was a really fun conversation, and we weren't close friends or anything, but we certainly crossed paths quite a bit with her and her family at Five Oaks, and I appreciated her honesty and her introspection. Both were very valuable in this conversation, and she's very thoughtful about her answers, and so I appreciated those. It was, as you said, interesting to hear because her family was, before we've referred to the Holy Rollers before, which was the roller rink group for the church. She was even before then.
No, she was right after that.
She was right after then. That's right.
Right after that.
And so he was close to original Five Oaks families as we get. So, her parents were involved. I was on drama team for multiple years, and, her mom's got a theater background. We talk about that a little bit and how that shaped some drama stuff, which is pretty fun. But most of all, just, hearing her journey from being excited to join the youth group and then how that has kind of matured and changed over time.
Yeah, it was funny. I don't know if it was on the show. It might have been before we were recording, but it was pretty hilarious. My sister, Bethany, who's been on the show, used to babysit her and her brother all the time.
Right.
My parents went back and forth with her parents. And, there's definitely, I think, my mom still sees her mother, Marcy. I think she mentions her mom's name on the show, Marcy, quite a bit. So I think they go back and forth occasionally. And, just it was great to have somebody reach out. I mean, she actually reached out to us and was interested. And that's what we're looking for is somebody who wants to come on and, share her story. She was worried about, I don't know if I'll have enough to say. And she had great things to say.
Yes.
And it was great to hear her story. So that's what we want this is a chance to hear more people's stories and just more of the tapestry that is these lives that launched out of this church. So I think it was great to have her on the show.
Yes, Erica, thank you very, very much for being a diligent listener. We really appreciate that, as well as joining us for the show. If any of you listening out there are interested in coming on the show, telling your story, positive or negative, doesn't matter. We're just here to listen to your journey and your story. Please do reach out to us because we'd love to hear from you. At any rate, again, Erica, thank you for joining us. And to everyone else, thank you for listening. And we hope you enjoy the show. Thanks very much.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
All right, Erica, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's great to see you. Like most people, it's been a couple of decades. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I've been enjoying listening to the podcast and having a little bit of nostalgia trip. It's been great.
Excellent. That's what we're going for. Neither of our moms are listening. Well, our moms are probably listening and someone else. So that is excellent.
My mom is definitely going to listen to at least this one.
My mom's way behind, so we need other moms to step up here.
Yeah, moms, help us out. Help us out, please. Well, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Breaking the mold a little bit again, because you were not in youth group per se in the 90s, although you were in our church and you were kind of, someone who was looking forward to being in youth group, although that happened a little bit later. So tell us just a little bit of background. Why did you attend Five Oaks, and then when did you start going to the youth group?
Yeah, I started attending Five Oaks way back when it was still the Evangelical Free Church of Woodbury.
Nice.
I remember as maybe a 4 years old, being in the back of the high school choir room on the floor coloring in a coloring book while church happened in that choir room.
Wow.
So my mom would be sitting there listening to, at that point it would have been Pastor Mark.
Yep.
Since very, very early in the church. And then I remember they migrated into the high school auditorium, moving on up. I remember occasionally helping, like when my dad started coming to church too, sometimes he would be the one who would be down in the orchestra pit and would change the transparencies. This is way before PowerPoint.
Yes.
So actual physical transparency projector with the song lyrics on it for worship time.
The overhead machine, yes.
The overhead projector.
Yeah.
So sometimes I would be down there with him, and I always thought that was very special. and then we moved over to the junior high, and eventually got the old building. So yeah, I knew about the youth group from the very beginning, and I had been looking forward to joining it. Some of your previous episodes, you've talked about the whole kidnapping thing, and I felt like coming in and be like, we looked forward to that. We wanted to be kidnapped. It was so exciting.
There's a phrase you didn't think you'd hear uttered tonight, huh? We looked forward to being kidnapped.
We might have our subtitle here already. No, maybe at that point it was so well known that if you know it's coming, that's a little bit of a different thing. Of course, when Kayla and I did it, there were legit kids who had no idea. So,
okay, that is different.
But I'm glad it got to a point where you were looking forward to it.
Like my mom had packed an overnight bag for me and everything, so at least the parents knew that the kids were going to be kidnapped. We just didn't know the date.
Yes. Okay. Well, there's some mystery there. It's funny you bring up the overhead machine because I joined in '94, and I think they were going to the high school at that time, and I wanted to be involved, and I was very enthusiastic, and so they made me one of the people who did the overheads, right? And so you would just take, like you said, in a plastic sheet, normal piece of paper. We're dating ourselves so bad, but a normal piece of paper and a plastic sheet, and you just throw it up, however it all worked. And that was very important because people needed to follow along. So I actually made myself a t-shirt that said Overhead Boy on it. And I don't know if I drew on it or how I got it made, but I was very proud of that. So, but to go back to the choir room, you're only one step away from roller rink at that point. A roller rink's like the original crew.
I think technically they met in houses before the roller rink. I had heard about the holy rollers, as it were. But no, my mom started getting involved in the church again when I was 3. My younger brother was maybe 2 or so. Both of my parents grew up Roman Catholic, and my mom would joke that she was a FARC, a fallen away Roman Catholic.
Oh.
And when she had babies, she told me this. She said she thought she better get us involved in a church somewhere because she wanted us to know that God was watching us even when she couldn't. And that sounds comforting, but I think she meant it more in a threatening way. No, maybe not threatening, just you better watch out, that sort of thing.
Santa Claus-ish. Yeah.
And I believe it was Tina, the pastor's wife. I could have this wrong. Mom, I know you're listening, so you can correct me later, but basically introduced my mom to the concept of, salvation, born again, getting saved and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually she and other people in the church got my dad to come too. He was agnostic. He also had a kind of conversion experience.
Mm-hmm.
For me at the time, all I really remembered that was on Sunday mornings, I used to have a choice to go to church with mom or stay home with dad. And then at some point I didn't have a choice anymore.
Gotcha. All right, that's it. That's an interesting summary of your family growing up. So it wasn't like initially, it wasn't steeped in evangelical tradition. Initially, they kind of were in a group that was, a couple that was invited and converted.
Yes. I think my mom. I'm telling my mom's story here, but it's
yours.
It's relevant. She's told me before that one of the things that really got her interested in knowing who Jesus is as a person was the movie The Last Temptation of Christ.
Oh, sure.
Which I always bring up now when I talk about Christian art, Christian movies, Christian media, because from what I understand, that movie got a lot of controversy.
Yes.
Got some protests and whatnot, and it's not, scripturally accurate or anything like that. But I point to that and I say, if it weren't for that movie, my mother would not have started going to church. So,
thanks, Martin Scorsese.
That's right. Not maybe his intended consequence, but that's fine. That's fine. We had talking a little bit beforehand. You kind of came up into the youth group during a transition time when the youth pastors were changing over. And you had used the word earlier that I'm sure John, our old youth pastor himself, would appreciate very much, which is the word iconic. You described it as such. So what was your anticipation, your experience getting started at that 7th grade level in the youth group?
Well, I think John may have still been the youth pastor maybe when I started, maybe through 7th and 8th grade or something like that. But I remember going into, I could have the years wrong here, but going into high school and getting into, the upper echelons of the leadership, because I was on various leadership teams in the youth group as well, when John decided to leave and it was transitioned over to Tim. And Tim was wonderful, of course. Mm-hmm. But at the time, because the youth group was this iconic force within the church, and I'd grown up the whole time kind of just idolizing this group and being like, I'm going to be able to be up there someday, and it's going to be just like this and just like it's always been. And then John wasn't there anymore, who had seemed like such a pillar, to a 12, 13-year-old such as myself. It was a little bit like, I'm not going to get the exact same experience that I've been seeing all these big kids have, that sort of thing.
Sure.
But then it was great. Tim was great, so.
Tim is the person we interviewed, previously on the podcast. Last name starts with a B, so go back and listen to that one if you haven't. Tim has always been and will always be a great dude. So, as he talked about big shoes to fill, because that youth group was, as you say, iconic's a good word, I think, even though it's kind of a big word to use. It spoke for itself. A lot of kids were waiting and ready to have that experience because of what John himself had built through us.
Yeah, definitely.
It's interesting to even hear that there was this anticipation. I guess I never thought about it, right? Because I jumped right in. We started coming to Five Oaks, and I jumped right in. Scott, same thing, right? You came to Five Oaks and jumped right in. This idea that it was like a building or like a something to look forward to. I've never thought about that perspective, that it's almost like the youth group experience that we had, because it was so unique. It actually had an impact on you pre-youth group and like your experience with the church, because the youth group had become such a pillar. That's a really good word of the experience at the church. So I've never thought about it that way, that it had an impact on kids not in the youth group, but that were in the church.
Oh yeah, grown up in Five Oaks, definitely something to be looking forward to.
Well, what were some of once you got there and were participating? Caleb and I were on the leadership team that obviously continued into your age as well. Although I understand from talking to Tim, he moved it from Sunday mornings to Sunday afternoons. So that must have felt nice.
Uh, I do remember just my entire Sunday being gone.
Yeah.
Just the entire
Nice. Yes.
I remember like 7 a.m. meetings on Sundays.
Sure.
Maybe that did change and I just don't I only remember the early ones, but I remember very early before church meetings of the I think it was called the ministry team.
Hmm.
You
Oh
could
yeah.
you could only be on you could only be on that leadership team
Yep.
in ninth grade and above.
Mm-hmm.
And then there would be Sunday school, or I think at one point it was discipleship groups,
Mm-hmm.
and that would
Mm-hmm.
be during the first service, and then you would go and attend the second service, and then there would usually be something after that, like another maybe that was discipleship groups. Yeah, I think that was you could have a discipleship group like early Sunday afternoon, and then something else Sunday nights. I think like the younger youth group, like when they split it up into seventh and eighth or junior high versus high school. I know they were on Sunday nights. So yeah, it was just
Yep.
a lot of church and youth group on all day Sundays.
Hmm.
It's the commitment that they were asking for. It's just all.
Part-time job.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, half your weekend. Give it to us.
And then Wednesday nights as well.
Yeah.
Right, of course. What were some of your most vivid memories? Just maybe it's an activity, the people, the leaders. It sounds like a little bit too. Like, what are some very upfront in your brain memories that you have of that youth group?
I have some just simple sense memories. I remember sitting on the floor. I remember that carpet. I remember the ratty couches that
Mm-hmm.
they would get donated, or I don't know where they got them, but there were
Stolen,
always these.
probably. Yeah.
Maybe they were curb pickups, who knows,
Yeah.
in that room. I think this was before the building was fully a church. My memory's hazy on that. I remember the games. Actually, I think I may have blocked most of those out. I remember once we had a lock-in and we played sardines. Do either of you remember sardines at all?
My kids play it at youth group stuff now, so
Okay.
I don't remember playing it, but it's still definitely a thing.
I just remember that they turned off all the lights in the whole building and one
Yes.
person had to go and hide somewhere.
Yes.
And then everybody had to search for that person. And once you found them, you hid with them. And you
Yes.
tried to, not be
Squeeze
the
in.
last one to find the group. And I think whoever this it was one of the boys I remember had climbed up on top of a bathroom stall and was just monkey Spider-Manning up there in the dark, in the full darkness of the whole building. And I think that's where a bunch of us ended up squeezing in.
Amazing.
So that's my memory.
Well, there you go. I lived up to the hype a little bit because that sounds pretty fun for eighth, ninth grader. So personally, for you, like, what was it like for you, having come up so early on in that church from your very first memory, all of a sudden, kind of culminating in the youth group? How would you describe it?
I remember being always encouraged to be inviting my friends to various events, to having a regular Bible study, a lot of memory verses, a lot of group meetings with accountability of like, oh, did you do your Bible study this week?
Mm.
I remember the mission trips. I remember going to Mexico. I
Mm.
remember going to France at
Mm.
that camp one year.
What did faith look like in the 90s? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, it was the faith of a child,
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say. Rather simplistic. I really don't remember having any kind of problems. I don't remember having any problems because it was just, oh, this is what we believe. This is
Mm.
how we believe, and this is what we are taught, and this is just how the world is.
Mm-hmm.
I remember then I think I was a junior in high school, so 16, 17. I remember having a crisis, and I thought it was because I read the book of Ecclesiastes with all of the, yeah, basically everything is meaningless.
Yes. Yeah.
until the very end when it's not. But most
Yep.
of the book is everything is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just getting into a funk about it,
Hmm.
and my enthusiasm, my passion for church, for the Lord, for Bible study and everything. I read some hard passages that I was angry about, and then I would, cry and feel bad about not liking those passages, that sort of thing. And I think for a long time I thought, like, I literally blamed Ecclesiastes. I was like, oh man, Ecclesiastes really messed me up. I'm having a real crisis here of just finding the motivation and
Mm-hmm.
the same kind of childlike passion that I'd had before. I know now that that was just me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what happens to everybody as you transition into being an adult and thinking about things more critically and having to examine your faith and scripture. But that's kind of the journey I went on in youth group times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ecclesiastes, and there are some other books in there where it's like, yeah, don't read those just yet. You got to wait. Like, John or Tim did probably never did a youth group series on those books for various reasons. So, are there any other specific teachings that maybe were the opposite for you that were like, hey, really encouraging, something that really resounded with you? Maybe it was from John, from Tim, maybe it was at a conference. Like, was there a teaching that really stuck out to you?
I'm not sure if I can say anything particularly stuck out from youth group specifically. It would be more just, Christian teaching in general at that
Sure.
time. Maybe the idea that you need to make friends before proselytizing. um, I think because there definitely was and is a pressure to get out there and witness, to save
Mm-hmm.
people, to save your friends. And right now I look back on that and it's kind of, it was definitely, it was a little cringy.
Sure.
But I don't remember who specifically said this, but I remember there being the idea of you don't have to make witnessing for Christ or evangelizing the whole point. You should be getting out there into the world and making friends and doing the thing you love and using that as a witness.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to become a missionary. You can go do something that God is calling you toward and be a light through that.
Yeah, and that's hard to maybe absorb as a 16, 17-year old when where you're having a lot of fun. And it's like, hey, you want to invite other people, and you're told to invite other people as well. As we're recording, the three of us, the episode has not come out yet, but by the time, Erica, yours is released, it will have. We talked with Leah, who kind of had the same reaction and the same answer a little bit, which was, hey, now instead of, going to, serve somebody or feed them, and maybe also give them the message, or maybe at worst give them one of those tracks we used to have. Now, she realized I can just go feed them, and I don't need to kind of combine the message with it all the time. That's not always necessary.
Yeah.
That is a little bit of growing up that people tend to do and watch. But also, too, youth group is a very social setting, right? It's a very bring your friends kind of thing. So, yeah, I can always remember how that was kind of job number one. If you're not on leadership team, and even if you are, of course, get your friends in here ASAP.
Gosh, I feel like there were quotas. I don't think there were actual quotas, but no, there. I feel okay. Maybe I'm making this up. Maybe this is my brain inventing something. But I feel like every time there was an event coming up, there was like an assignment. It was like you need to invite 5 friends.
Some unsaid quota, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you were on leadership team, then you definitely have to bring friends.
I don't know if I had 5 friends outside of youth group. I mean, I feel like all of my friends were youth group friends. So who was I? I'm trying to think if I was who was I inviting that wasn't already coming.
We would do the thing we talked about already, Caleb. We just stick signs on our backpacks and invite
Yeah.
people we didn't know.
There's the guy I ran cross country with. I bet you I just invited him to everything, and he just kept on saying no. And he just knew it was coming. Like, hey, I'm going to invite you to this. I'm not going, Caleb. I
I'm
know.
busy again. Well, overall, and this kind of last question about your youth group experience, like, what did you love about it? Did it live up to the iconic hype? It's fine if it didn't, but like, what did you just really love about it?
I mean, I think I loved the camaraderie.
Hmm.
I loved being part of a group. I loved having responsibility and I guess some authority as one of the leaders. It's nice when you're a teenager to have younger kids looking up to you.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You can take that as a good or a bad thing. I probably had a little bit of a power trip over it sometimes, but I remember trying to be good about that.
Mm-hmm.
uh, just the experiences, especially some of the big old road trip type things. We went to the conference at Purdue, I
Yep.
think in
Yeah.
gosh, was that 2000, something like that. And I did make some very good friends through the youth group. I haven't really kept in touch with anybody, but I did have a pretty strong friend group in the youth group.
We've talked to some people who now their kids don't have that for various reasons. I think a lot of us in Woodbury were very much like, this is our hometown, this is our home church. Like Caleb said, this is our friend group. And it lasted only a short amount of time, but man, some of those memories and friend and relationships are lifelong. So it was a place where those things were fostered. All right, well, jumping forward then, like, in general, how does your faith now compare to where it's at in the 90s? Is it the same? Is it different? What's changed?
Uh, I'd say it's not. I don't want to say it's not as strong. It's different. I still I still believe in Jesus and what he did for us on the cross. It's difficult. It's been a long, slow slide of not doing a lot of the things that I thought made a Christian.
Mm,
Daily Bible study, daily prayer, witnessing, going to church and other Bible studies, group
mm-hmm.
Bible studies every week. And I still do a lot of those things, but I don't keep up like a daily journal. Like around Christmas, I did an Advent one. So it's for a while, in my 20s or so, it was I would get scared because I'd feel my ability to care that I was in my mind slipping,
Mm,
also slipping. So for a while I was like, well, as long as you still care that you're slipping, it's okay. And then I stopped caring.
sure.
And yes, it's very different now. There are it's just different. I still believe, but so many of the things that I grew up thinking, oh, this is what a Christian needs to do, have fallen by the wayside.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the honest answer. And I can identify with that because, yeah, we were. Another thing I'll throw on that list is like scripture memorization, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're always supposed to have your scripture memorized and ready to go. And yeah, it's just not the same. It's not habitual. And I really was convinced that it would just be
Yes.
habitual for the rest of my life. And even it wasn't even like, oh, I went to college and day one I just stopped reading my Bible. Like that wasn't it. It was just eventually it just wasn't as much of a practice anymore. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just changes.
I still go to a church. I volunteer there. But one of I don't think anybody from my current church is going to listen to this. I don't know, who knows, but
Never know.
I have been volunteering there on Sunday mornings because I know if I don't have something waiting for me where people are expecting me to show up, I'm not going to go.
Oh,
Hmm.
sure.
I'm just going to sleep in because I'm lazy. I'm lazy like that. So that sort of thing. And
Sure.
actually, I think I've told people in the church that, so that's not a secret. Never mind.
I think a lot of people post COVID, it did happen. Like there was this all of a sudden I wasn't going, and like I think that's why some some people have struggled with getting connected to a church post COVID, especially because it was like all of a sudden I had my Sunday mornings back and I had a little more free time. And I think some people, a real question that churches need to grapple with is there were people who were like, I'm not getting anything out of this, isn't enhancing my life. Why am I going to do it every Sunday? I think that's a real question that people have to answer and have to think through. So I mean, I think that's especially in a post-COVID world, that was something that I think a lot of people, well, it's a whole other thing, my current experience, but yeah, I think that's a legit thing that some of us have gone through. And I think churches have to answer, what are we doing why are we making this a priority to show up on Sunday mornings, that it impacts people's lives?
Yeah, church can be done in multiple different ways. I know that when I was living in Rochester, we would do Saturday night church, and we just have our Sunday mornings free, our whole Sunday free. And like you said, Eric, earlier, it wasn't all consumed by all the church that we had to do. You know, I also think of your comment about not caring so much. And, you know, there were some of those moral habitual indicators of, if you're a Christian, this is a fruit that you will bear as, you know, your habitual practices. When, okay, for a time, that's great. But now those fruits have maybe changed, and our understanding of what those fruits look like have changed. And they're not so distinct. They're not so distinct as, hey, what are you doing on Sunday? Well, I'm going to church all day. You know, or, you know, hey, I'll be late, or, you know, I'm doing something else. I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying. Like, that's not how it is anymore.
I think too, there becomes this thing of like, it's not doing them out of fear. Like when it happened, like, I think that's so much of my motivation early on was out of fear, out of like, well, if I don't do this, like you said, like if I don't do this, I'm not a Christian, so I better do this. And now when I do partake of those things, it feels much more like a choice, and it feels much more, I feel excited about it because it's like, I'm not doing it out of fear. And I think that's a transition. So like, yeah, if it doesn't happen every day, I'm not worried we live busy lives. All of us do. Like, oh, I didn't get my Bible reading in today. I didn't get my journaling. I'm not a journaler. Nobody wants to hear what I write, but like, I didn't get my Bible reading in today. I'm not going to be afraid. I'm not going to be fearful. It's not going to hit me that way. And I think that is a maturing in faith. That is a change in faith that, you know, and I understand why they push that on high school kids. Got to read every day. If you don't, you're not showing fruit. That's a great word, Scott. But like, yeah, that does eventually fall by the wayside, and you're not doing those things out of fear, because that's not a great way to, not a good reason to be doing anything.
Fear as a motivator will never sustain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for a while, it was very fear motivated for me. I think I saw some of my youth group peers going out into the world, especially in college, and finding out, you know, scandalously later on that they didn't believe anymore, or they had been espousing other ideas and beliefs that weren't in keeping with what we had been raised on. Very, very scandalous. And having a sense, at that point in my life, having a sense of superiority, that, oh, I'm not going to end up like that. And then slipping that way and being afraid that meant I was going to, well, let's just put it bluntly, I'm going to go to hell.
Yeah. As if like it didn't matter what you'd done beforehand, you know, or like what you're.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were afraid that it would just stop. And for some people, that belief stops. Okay. But for a lot of us, you know, it just changes. Yeah. And change is not a bad thing. So that was the what. How about the why? Like, was there something that impacted your faith that made you get to that point of not being worried about those daily habits or what you thought a Christian would be? Like, why do you think things changed for you?
Well, I think I'm going to be echoing a lot of what some of your previous guests have been talking about, specifically with what I perceived to be a shift in evangelical culture around, 2016 or so.
Do tell.
What?
This is the first I've heard of
it. No, I mean, it's one of those things where I'm almost, I do feel shame at growing up, going off to college, even, becoming a full on adult, reaching my 30s and not really examining any of that.
Hmm.
Just going along to get along, not questioning what I was taught or that culture because I didn't want to think about it and
Hmm.
it was just easier to not.
Mm-hmm.
But, then Trump came around and a lot of people in my life whom I had looked up to were supportive of that kind of leader. And it made me realize it felt like a betrayal.
Hmm.
It felt like, what have we been teaching this whole time that you would think this is even remotely okay?
Mm-hmm.
And what can I believe anymore?
Hmm.
If you're, in my opinion, if you're so clearly wrong about this, what else are we wrong about?
Mm-hmm.
So that really catapulted me to a lot of different beliefs in a very short time frame.
Oh,
Hmm.
Here's another one. I mentioned earlier, I'm a big nerd. I
you
play
did.
a lot of I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah.
which was just getting out of the satanic panic at the time I started playing it in high school.
Mm-hmm.
But that space, especially in the past 10 years or so, has really exploded in popularity. You may or may not have seen a lot of the various media out there right now that are based on Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got a live play Dungeons and Dragons podcast. I had one over the pandemic. It's just a thing now. So, one of the parts of that geek culture that has really been growing, especially in those past 10 years, is kind of just this radical inclusivity.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
a lot of affirmation, it's a lot of acceptance. And I think a lot of people who aren't aware of that huge shift in that space might think about, oh, D&D, it's just nerds, mostly guys in their mom's basements and they don't know how to talk to girls and everything. That's not what the space is like at all now.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's very, very much radically inclusive. I bring that up because I looked at those geek spaces and I was like, this is what the church wants to be.
Hmm.
Mm.
This kind of bringing together so many different kinds of people who are passionate about a thing and accepting them all and being able to have community with them all. That's what I want the church to be.
Hmm.
Mm.
Obviously there needs to be a limit to radical inclusivity and certain things. I don't want to be like a total moral relativist, but for instance, like we grew up in a culture that was very against gay marriage and homosexuality, and that is not something I truck with anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
One of the newer things is the idea of gender fluidity. And for me, one of the things that I got out into the world doing in the time where I was kind of exploring some nerd spaces was improv. And I remember one of my improv playmates being very scared to tell the group that they wanted to use they them pronouns. And for me at that time, it was kind of new to me. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what I thought of it, but I saw how scared they were to
Mm.
tell everybody that and how important it was to them.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking to myself, as a Christian, I think I am called to respect this.
Mm.
And maybe that's not exactly what scripture says. Maybe there are different ways to interpret all of that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not going to reject this person in clearly a moment that is incredibly important to them just because I've decided to read scripture a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
which other people disagree with. So those kind of things changed a lot about what I thought of the world.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for that very honest answer. And we are still in a time of, significant change for people in that community, which, responding to them in a Christian way is kind of it's what a lot of the evangelical circles are trying to respond to, and they just don't know how to do it. And I have a lot of conversations with people who either get upset or at best confused by the pronoun conversation. And, one of the comments I hear all the time from certain people in my own family is, well, like, now everybody can just be whatever they want to be. And it's like, you know what? It's not that simple. And B, for a long time, people who were in that space had no space to come out and be themselves in. And they've always been there. And now, they have these spaces like these groups that you're talking about that are inclusive and will accept them for who they've been, in my opinion, created to be. And that opinion can differ from other people. But as a Christian, at what point is it, respecting and just treating them out of love?
I like the thoughtful nature in which you've undertaken that. Like it doesn't feel like it was just a simple, like, I'm in this group, they're doing this group, they're doing it this way, so I'm going to do it. Or I'm just going to stick with what I've always done. Like, I like that it feels like there was a thought process and an analyzing of what do I think God is calling me to do in this situation? And not just following either of those just for the sake of following along, but saying, I'm going to learn from both sides of this, and I'm going to try and do what I think God is calling me to do. I think that's a really valiant way of going into it, and I think is a good example to follow. And, even if people come out with different how they want to handle those things, that's fine. But it feels like a much more thoughtful process than what I think a lot of people have given this really, really tough subject and a really complicated, I think Scott used that word, complicated subject. So yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not going to claim that I have it exactly right, because everything's always changing, but that's how I think it's right to handle that at this particular moment.
Of course, it's your best intention of, being in those people's lives, along with how you're living out your faith. Looking back on it all, on youth group as a whole, like, is there something that you just struggle with, or you used the word earlier, cringe at, that was that you're just like, I can't believe we did that? It doesn't necessarily have to be a big teaching or whatever, but anything that you struggle with.
I definitely look back and cringe on some of the moral superiority that I know I felt. You talked about, in some of your previous episodes, you've talked about, sure, there are other, quote, Christians out there, but we're the real ones. Yep. We have to go save those Lutherans.
Yep.
Especially the Catholics. Oh my gosh, I have cousins who are Catholic, and I was so upset. I was so upset. I was just I have to save them.
Makes for fun family get-togethers, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the idea. This is not limited to specifically youth group Christians, but it's really more of a widespread young person thing. But just the idea that, of course, I have it right. Of course, I know what I'm doing, and and my beliefs are never going to change on this matter.
Very appropriate for the age, that's for sure. But yeah, that combined with an evangelical model of proselytizing and conversion, it was just that confidence on steroids.
Yep.
A lot of people that we've talked to have come out of it and been like, yeah, I was very certain of one thing, and I am not certain of that at all. In fact, I'm not certain of anything anymore. So let's just be comfortable in that space too.
I like how you said that, being comfortable in the uncertainty. I'd say that is definitely a place I'm living right now.
To be quite honest, it's just a theme of a lot of people we've talked to as of late. At the beginning, not so much. We didn't really find that in our conversations, and look, maybe that's a developmental thing as well. Maybe all adults feel less certain about everything, but to have a evangelical upbringing that was very, very dependent on being certain of it, it's a big shift. And some people don't survive, quote unquote, survive that shift, right? They just leave the church altogether. I pair up these questions all the time. What would your younger self say to your, now adult self, your 18-year-old self say to your teenager self, whatever, say to your adult self now, and vice versa? Would it be an antagonistic conversation, or, do you think they would respect each other?
Well, I've often said, do you ever just wish you could reach back through time and slap yourself in the face?
So it wouldn't be
Sometimes
much of a conversation, is what you're saying.
sometimes I feel that way. I think my 18-year-old self would say something to my current day self, something along the lines of like, you can still do it. You can come back. I'll pray for you.
Mm,
Because she would be very worried about where my faith is right now.
mm,
And maybe not so much worried as scared.
Mm.
As for what I would say to my 18-year-old self, probably something along the lines of, hey, a lot of your faith is rooted in other people right now,
Mm.
and people are going to let you down.
mm.
So you gotta work on that.
Again, honest answers, and very much appreciate that. Yeah, it's again, it probably happens to everyone, but that change over time, a lot of people experience of getting to the spot and understand that, yeah, I didn't have it all together. I didn't know it all.
Mm-hmm.
It's formative. Is there any sort of teacher or teaching or a book or an author that you spiritually that you've read, identified with, that you've just really gotten into?
Nothing really comes to mind for that, except I do really appreciate what the church I attend now teaches.
Mm,
And that church is, I don't agree with that church on everything. There are some of its beliefs I wish were different, but I'm currently staying there because I have a good relationships with people, and I consider it my home church. But one of the reasons I stay there, despite not agreeing with them on so some of those things that I talked about changing my mind on earlier,
mm-hmm,
is that they are so incredibly Christ focused.
Hmm.
The pastor team, the leadership team, this is actually like a joke because you already know where a sermon is going before the pastor gets there. Because every single teaching is all about what Christ did for us
mm,
on the cross. It is constantly about how we cannot work our own salvation.
mm,
And as someone who has gone through that fear of, oh man, I haven't done a Bible study in honestly like 3 or 4 years at this point, or I don't remember the last time I earnestly prayed to God over over various things, and it wasn't just a quick, oh no, the airplane has turbulence, please don't let us crash.
mm-hmm. Sure.
So the teaching of this church, what they focus on of being like, hey, you cannot save yourself, Christ already did all of it for you, is very comforting to someone like me.
Mm. That's great. I don't know if you go to the same church as I do, but I would probably know because it's not huge. But I always feel like our sermons too are like, even if the scripture is not entirely about Jesus and that action of self-sacrifice, it's steering that way no matter what.
Oh yes,
Every time, no matter what.
our pastors must be part of the same club.
Well, I know where Scott's pastor got it from because he got it from a certain huge church downtown.
Right next door.
Yeah.
Well, a couple more questions for you then. In general, how do you think 2000s youth group contributes to the person that you are today?
It's hard to answer that because I don't know if I can point to any specific thing. I think the youth group itself, and then later on, I went to college and I was in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which was kind of youth group 2.0.
With more reading.
more, more reading. I think I don't want to be too negative in all of my thoughts here, but I think having that experience has helped me be maybe not more compassionate, but at least understanding of people who think they have it right.
Mm.
I need to work on my compassion. I need to work on my patience. But especially young people, I think there's an understanding that, oh, they're figuring it out. I remember what that was like, and I remember being so certain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's forced me to extend a little grace.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. You've heard episodes enough now to know that I'm going to ask you. Lastly, is there any nasty, crazy game that sticks out to you, or like we should not have done that? That was not the right choice.
Ugh.
Because kidnapping was a positive for you, right? So it was.
Kidnapping
Yeah, you've already turned this on
was
its
a
heels.
positive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not
yes.
traumatic.
We knew it was coming. We loved it. The sardines one is the one I first remembered.
Uh-huh.
I do remember an armpit hair in a peanut butter sandwich. I do remember somebody for some game getting peanut butter in their armpits, and then you wiped it off with pieces of bread. And did somebody eat that? I don't remember.
Legend has that they did.
Yes.
So.
And it sounds like maybe more than once. This has happened potentially multiple times. Because I had peanut butter and jelly in my armpits and somebody else ate it. And I don't know if you and I were crossed over. I don't know if you and I crossed paths in youth groups. That means
that's
potentially multiple times.
We do have, 5 years to work with? 6 years? I don't know. It's possible I could have been a 7th grader
when I was a senior.
One of you was a senior. It's possible.
Yeah, maybe, but still, like, the fact that it didn't stop at one time. Like, did they have it in their back pocket? They're like, hey, this youth group's boring. We got to bring out the hits. Get the peanut butter.
We're losing the kids. Get the PB&J.
Oh, I forgot though. I was gonna talk about the Carmen Human videos.
Yes.
Because you two have talked about those multiple times on this podcast. And my mother is the one who did those. You remember this?
100%. She was awesome. She cared so much about it being the production value because she has that theater background, right? So she was just like, if we're going to do it, we're doing it. It was great. It was great.
Yep. I remember those. I remember writing a sketch for the youth drama team once, because we had a youth drama team.
Oh, yes.
We had a youth band, a youth worship team that got to do like one Sunday every 6 months. Shout out to Troy. Sorry, I was very bad at piano. And I choreographed one of those Carmen. I don't know if it must have been Carmen. Maybe it was a different, similarly bombastic song, but I choreographed one of those, and I was so proud of how it turned out. We had sign language in it. Ooh. It was great.
Was it Secret Ambition by Michael W. Smith?
No. It was the verse in Isaiah. It was the surely we esteemed him not. I could sing it.
I do remember you all having that kind of training per se. It's just like that was we could rely on someone who kind of knew what they were doing, not just some parent volunteering to make it right.
Yep, Mom was very passionate about that. She's great. She's going to listen to this. I know you're hearing this, Mom. She was great. She really, really, really brought something special to the church with the dramas, which were all the rage in the 90s. All the rage.
Yes. I distinctly remember it was after college. So I was back at some point attending there. I was in seminary and stuff as well. So and my wife and I were dating, engaged, whatever, for up until 2005 when we got married. I was on the drama team, and your mom was running it. And we'd have a drama, like every couple weeks. And it was great. And I distinctly remember moving in 2007, 2008. And we found a church. I was like, does this church have a drama team? They're like, what are you talking about? Like, no. Aww. Nobody does that anymore. I'm like, oh, the fad died. It was so much fun.
I don't know.
My church has a drama team.
They do?
They do. It's video now, so it's not live performances.
Yeah, everybody
they'll-
pivoted to video.
Yeah, but they do performances for the video, and then they produce the video. So you're just at the wrong church. That's your problem, Scott. You've lost the dream. You just need to find a church that's got a drama.
Well, I'm going to tell my family we're going to move churches now. They better get ready. Well, Erica, thank you very much for joining us and talking through your experience. We appreciate your honest answers and wanted to jump on. And thanks for listening and just continuing to kind of participate and reflect on something that was clearly very important to us. And it sounds like it's stuck with you in some ways that maybe your leaders, your friends, your parents didn't really expect, but it's still kind of there in some way.
Thank you so much for letting me come on and reminisce and chat with you too.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you for a great interview, and we'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to thank Erica for reaching out. It was fantastic to have her on the show and to hear her honest and insightful answers. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG. You can also email the show at ISurvivedYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, just like Erica, let us know. She reached out to us, got a hold of us, and said she'd be interested in talking. You didn't necessarily have to attend our youth group, but if you have your own youth group experience from the 90s or the 2000s, we would love to connect. We'd love to have you in the show. We'd love to hear your story. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or a review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. I've had a couple different formats on the show, but right now it's a chance to sit down and talk with somebody about one of these albums that's celebrating a big anniversary and just find out why they like it, why it's important to them. Once again, that's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.
Well, hey, Erica, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate catching up with you and seeing you again.
Hold on, Scott. You got to do that again. Can't play with your microphone and do that.
Wait, this? You don't want to do this?
It's not going to work. I can hear it.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I get all handsy.